Welcome to The Decision from Nashville EO, where you will hear the rest of the story after tough decisions were made by entrepreneurs who faced adversity and lived to tell about it.
Have you been in a situation where you're just stuck? As an entrepreneur, you're going to find yourself in a crossroads, the decision you need to make for your life or your business. And many times that process is lonely and very tough to take that next action. The decision is how we help in Nashville Entrepreneur Organization make that critical decision for you and your business or your life through experience shares of other members inside Form. This is a three-part series where we are going to work on how to give a great presentation, how to not only coach, but be coached in that presentation, and last but not least, how to be a great formate during that process of receiving a presentation inside Form. If you haven't checked out Entrepreneur Organization, we'd love to have you come to an event, learn about how this organization has helped hundreds of fellow Nashville entrepreneurs grow their business through sharing best practices and experiences. I am Robert Hartline, along with Eric Jackson, Colton Mulligan, to cover some of the basics on how to give a great presentation. Now, Eric, how long have you been in EO?
I joined in 2008, so about 15 years. I think it's coming up on 15.
I'm right at 8. And Colton, what about you?
Coming up on 6.
On 6. Well, when we started talking about as a chapter in our board about what does Nashville need, it really came across that there is an added need for a place to talk about how to do a great presentation to really get good value of our Form experience. And every Form is different. They're kind of on their own little island by themselves sometimes. And, you know, it's been a long time since I've had Form training. And I know Entrepreneur Organization has changed their style that they work with training Forms. And I'm just kind of rusty. And so the purpose of The Decision, our podcast, is to not only shine the light on different things that have worked in the past with a presentation, but what happened after the drama. After that decision was made, we're going to go back to these entrepreneurs and hear the full story. The drama, you know, what happened. And it's my hope to not just have a normal, everyday podcast where we're hearing about someone's founder story. We want to hear the drama. We want to have a searchable list of podcasts when you're dealing with your own drama and you're considering that next presentation. You can go to a library of other experiences that kind of get primed and ready for that presentation, or maybe even be inspired that there could be a decision. And sometimes we make these decisions under a great deal of stress, and those decisions just sometimes don't even happen. We just go with indecision, no decision, and then let the situation make the decision. So thank you for you guys joining here today. As a 8-year, you know, I can call it, maybe I'm a veteran. There's a lot I don't know about doing proper presentations, but Colton, you have some experience to share that you're going through some higher level of training than both Eric and I have done. Can you talk to us about that?
So shortly after I joined, me and Ellie Bird, who is, I would like to call her like the mother of EO. I'm sure others may
she is,
may
absolutely.
have contention with that, but she's been training Nashville for forever. Every new class of members to come through, et cetera. She's written so much curriculum that's got into it. She and I just really geeked out after training, and I was planning our first retreat. And short story, she said, hey, I'd love for you to be one of my Forum Sherpas. So I went through her training certification process, and then I mean, literally right after my first year, I started going out and facilitating retreats for other forums, specifically about like dealing when there's, conflict in the middle of a forum, but also like, hey, how do you get to the 5%? And I've been doing this across EO, YPO, Harvard Business School forums. So everything that kind of takes the shape of what forum is, I've spent a lot of time understanding her best practices that also come from EO, and then going out into the field more or less and learning so much, because I work with some forums that have been together 10 years, some that are in their first year. And so anyway, that's some of the perspective I've got.
My first forum training was really impactful for me. I learned so much in that full day session, and the lesson started in the first 10 seconds because one of my forum mates shows up after it had started. He walks in. You guys know where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
And she looked right at him and said, you need to leave. And his eyes got real big. He was like, oh, I'm being kicked out. And that was a really good experience for our entire forum, because that set the stage how important it is to be on time. You got to be on time. And forum is important. There are people that are sometimes in a crisis and they need everyone to be attentive. And for someone to be late and blasé about being on time and attendance. And it really set the stage for that forum of ours. And we were on time. And he was certainly on time for the rest of the time. But I certainly got red in the face and I was like, ooh, that's not fun. But the forum training was great.
Are you talking about this because I was literally 90 seconds late to this recording?
You were totally late. Yes, yes, absolutely.
All right. We'll get you up. Well, what do we want to dive into?
So for me, a lot of terms have changed. And I think that's a good place for us to start, because tell me what terms have kind of changed when it comes to regarding presentations. Well, first off, why does EO have presentations in a forum in the first place? Let's start from the basics.
I think... Oh, I don't know. I've never even looked into that specifically. I would gather from the overall value that's being offered is it gives someone the opportunity to explore a space with the audience of peers. They talk a lot now about self-discovery and then experience shares from others. And presentations is, I would argue, like this weird format they figured out that does a great job of helping people get to deeper layers, be transparent and vulnerable. And with that specific format, then offering others the chance to come in and say, hey, here's the experience that resonates with me for shared learning and discovery. So I think that's why presentations exist.
Eric, what do you think?
In my experience, as we like to say, it had to come out eventually.
Hell yeah.
I think the act of creating the experience and even getting coached makes you discover the root of the real problem. We go around thinking, well, this is what my problem might actually is. But in many cases, we've never really dug and deep enough to figure out what that actually is. And through coaching, through all that questioning in the presentation experience, you begin to sometimes uncover things that really have a bigger impact on the decision you're going to need to make than you ever expected.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realize that the presentation, this is an entrepreneur organization. So business owners, right? You would think that it's just all about the business. And it's not all about the business. There's so much more that can happen in a presentation that has nothing to do with the business, but everything to do with the business. Because our personal lives are so tied to that business, and it's our energy that actually runs the company, right? But if our energy is being brought down because we have our own challenges with our personal life, having a space where people can be authentic is critical, right? Because it's lonely. It's lonely running a company when payroll's on Friday. It's lonely running a company when, your key competitors are stealing your people, right? And so where can you go to really vocalize a challenge? We can go to our wives, but and they're a lot of help, right? Our spouses are a lot of help.
Until they freak out.
Yeah, but there's risk to sharing those stories with the spouse, right? Because we don't want to stress them out, and then we got more trouble.
Yep.
As evidence of the fact of what you just referenced, so at every retreat I facilitate, I have folks do Biz Buddies Balance. Have you guys done that? Oh,
explain,
gentlemen. So every retreat, it's a really great idea where Biz Buddies Balance, 3 categories that you could look at what folks want to get out of Forum. And exactly to your point, right? Most people, before they join EO, they think, oh man, I'm just so excited to have a business forum where I'm going to be able to grow my business. And don't get me wrong, those are some of the benefits of it. But Biz Buddies Balance says that most folks want to get business, which you get, those kind of topics. Then you have buddies, which is I just want friends that I can confide in and people, I want to feel like I have my people, right? Because as you age, or honestly, as your careers change, right, your friend group changes. And then the middle thing is balance, which is all of what I would call the soft stuff. That's the EQ. And that's all this stuff that really centers on a sense of identity or insecurity or the roles I'm being asked to fill. Am I happy? All the like metaphysical questions in life. That's what you do. And anyway, everybody breaks down, hey, if 100 percentage points, what do you want to get out of Forum this year? Rarely is any group's average more than 50% business. And I've been in some where it's literally the lowest factor of the 3.
Wow. And that experience to getting those, I guess those interests vocalized in a forum tends to happen typically faster at a retreat, wouldn't you say?
Man, it's exactly, I totally agree. 2, it's why I tell every group, which this is like Colton Mulligan, best friend. I don't know that like EO would tell you it's best practice, but I see so much growth happen the first time a forum gets together when you add a new member. Just do a simple overnight in the first 90 days. Because all of even just the, late night conversations and the inside jokes. But if you wind up doing a number of exercises that let you really get down into the 5%, everyone gets so much more vulnerable and transparent earlier. And the value you get out of it is so much richer, so much sooner.
Exactly. So let's talk about presentation in and of itself. Now, there's several types of presentations. Can you walk us through what's typical and then what's maybe not so typical?
First curveball. If you look at any of the slides from like moderator trainings and stuff like that right now, they don't even have the term presentations in there.
I was about to say, I thought that had changed. Yeah.
Are you telling me I have to change the terms now?
Yeah, we need to scrap the first half of this podcast. I'm going to be honest. You're already
perfect.
Effing it up.
Exactly why we're doing that.
That's it.
So what is it now?
They now refer to them as, they split them in terms of deep dives and discussions, largely is the way that they split it. And to be clear, I think part of the reason why they did it is a presentation, right? Like when I say, hey, like imagine a presentation in your head, what is it? Some guy's going to talk for 45 minutes. He's got slides behind him and he saves 10 minutes for Q&A. And that's obviously, we know that's not the format, right? So I think that's why they did it. And they're splitting that deep dive versus discussion. So with deep dives, that's really getting down to the 5% or 1%, and that's typically EQ space, which for those that don't know, EQ, your emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. And then there's the IQ space, which is the what and how of things. So that's more like, hey, I'm trying to restructure my organization for tax advantages, or I need better hiring practices, et cetera. Those are normally called discussions. And under there is really where you have a lot of depth of different things, from like brainstorming, debate, internal expert, external expert, et cetera, versus what you have on that other side, which are those deep dives, typically the more EQ-oriented stuff.
So when you go and you say 5%, get to the 5%, because some people may not know what that means.
Love it. Yeah, so on the bell curve of life, I'm having to move around the microphone here, so this is getting awkward. But in the bell curve of life, if that total bell curve is 100% of your experiences that are known to others, they say there's the 5% best and the 5% worst, which is, man, the 5% worst makes sense for a lot of folks, right? It deals with insecurities, problems in my marriage, problems in my business, indiscretions that I've had, right? I don't want to share those with anybody, because most folks would say, yeah, 80 to 90% of your life, you're comfortable sharing that people can see. The middle of that is like, oh, things you know where I work, you can Google it, you can find it. It's the other stuff outside of that. And I'd also argue this, I tell folks this, like not to forget about that upper 5%, which is the best stuff in life. And to be honest, you guys know this, like commonly as entrepreneurs, if you're the guy at the top, who do you can't go brag down to your employees. There's nobody anymore that says, hey, good job, man. You really crushed it in that pitch, et cetera. It's just you. And my wife can only so many times be like, okay, I get it. You're great at your job. Well, fantastic, Colton, right? And so, and I have to tell my forum that, so I've got type 1 bipolar, which means I've got my ups and downs. And I honestly celebrate my ups so much more because I know that a lot of my presentations during my downswings going into depression, it's going to be a lot of the 5% downs. So I always warn my forum, hey, I'm going up. I'm going to be bragging on myself a lot, and I'm glad I've got the space to do so.
That is great. So any advice for those forums that are kind of playing the BS game? You know, they're doing their updates, and
they're basically talking about the weather. I mean, they're not really digging in.
They're not digging in at all. How do we break that? Because we've all experienced where you're not getting that level, and it's particular people tend to do this, right? They're not opening up. How do you make that happen?
Two things. One, the moderator has an outsized impact on that, right? Or whoever the moderator isn't always the best like leader there, but it's modeling what you want to see. So and you guys have probably seen this, and this is any group, this is just social dynamics. If one person is willing to get really transparent and open, then the rest of the group can fall in line, because what did you do? You just set the boundaries for psychological safety. Oh my gosh. Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I'll talk about bipolar pretty openly, because it immediately, like, it lowers the bar very quickly for like how guarded I need to be, because someone just went what they perceive to be real deep, real quick, right? That's thing one. And then the other thing is, if you're doing really great clearing rounds with your forum, like I see this happen at a lot of retreats where somebody I just had this happen in the last few weeks where somebody said, hey, I'm going to be honest. I'm just making up names. Hey, I'm going to be honest. Kevin, I don't feel like you're bringing your 5%, and I want to see what the forum needs to do differently. Is there something that's keeping you from the 5%? Are you in an odd spot in life? But I want to know what's really going on with you, and I feel like lately you've been a little surface level.
Wow. Eric, what about you?
I remember that moment when I, new EO member, right, just got put in a forum with 7 other guys. We had an experienced moderator, and I don't remember what the topic was, wouldn't share it if I did, but somebody began to talk about something that was in the 5%, and everybody was like, oh, this just got real. You know, they revealed something that was very, very personal, very private. I want to say there were some tears involved. It was, oh, wow, okay, this is what I signed up for. And it was impactful, and it impact, you know, everybody in that. I still have 5 of those original 8 in my forum after 15 years. Everybody remembers those first few months. We had an experienced moderator, and we quickly realized that we could say things in that group that we couldn't say anywhere else. And
yeah,
life changing.
I like this. You know, it reminds me that how important it is for going deep and vulnerable in the beginning of a forum experience of something that may be in my life that is not going great, and encouraging that and reminding people when we don't hear the 5%, we just have to ask and just be frank in it. Guys, are everything perfect? Are we really this perfect? Like, surely something is not going right.
And I think the problem with it is, it's just not a natural place for most people to be, to sit down in a room with, 7 other strangers who've been trained, right? And they're not supposed to reveal any of this thing to the outside world. Can you really trust that that's going to happen? And so, as Colton described, going away for, an overnight, sharing a roof with these people for, 24, 48 hours makes a difference. You get to see how people actually are away from a forum meeting table and begin to understand each other on a deeper level. For us, it took a year to really dig in and get it when we went on retreat. But, again, my experience, it just took one person really diving into the deep end of the pool to let everybody else know that this is a different kind of experience.
It reminds me of our first retreat when I joined. we went on a retreat in Alabama, and it was the first time together we were all in a car. And, you know, of any advice on a retreat, if you can get in a car, it's way better than a plane because you get everyone in the same vicinity and you're stuck for, you know, for us, it was like 4 hours or 3.5. Anyway, we're in this car. We drive down there, not eventful, but we're coming back. There's a different driver. Now, this driver liked to go fast and liked to be on his phone and liked to talk at the same time and text and drive and call and which created some massive stress in the car, and which caused conflict. We were uncomfortable and we vocalized it. And that conflict was healthy because we got to see each other in a state that we had not seen each other prior. Because when you're together with a group of new people, right, you sugarcoat kind of a lot, right? You only show so much of your personality, but seeing someone upset and angry and frustrated is very healthy. And so if you can figure out a way to cause a little bit of tension sometimes, that also helps. But when we're talking about the 5%, it's easy to talk about, sometimes it seems to be, in my experience, easy to talk about a personal flaw or, you know, you're talking about bipolar, right? That's a 5%. But another thing is my company may not be making any money. And that's kind of a embarrassing 5% because I don't attribute them the same. A personal fault and my business fault, I treat differently, right? Because, you know, you get kind of worried about what someone thinks of your business. Am I hitting something for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think everybody has their own set of insecurities, and some people are different. I can talk about my business all day long, but my identity, I keep that very private. So it's interesting. I appreciate you sharing where you fall on that spectrum. I want to be very clear. I feel like this podcast, I don't have to respect Gestalt. I am literally here for advice and experience shares on perspective. For some reason, I still feel the need to get that shit out there.
Let it fly.
All right, there we go. So our forum has a couple things baked in, and I honestly encourage all groups to do that. In your first year, put it all out there. So everyone in our forum knows everybody else's revenue, gross profit. They know the salaries, that they know the take home for every single person. They know the salaries for most of the top executives and whatnot. We go through each other's tax returns when we're doing like tax planning and stuff like that. We've got Bo Hansen in our group who's phenomenal at that shit and can save everybody probably close to 6 figures in your business in over a year or two. So anyway, that's one of the things that's baked in, like it's part of our, it might even be part of our constitution, but it's part of our regular rhythms where we're checking in on those figures. So it kind of guarantees this thing. It's very hard for someone to slip down into, oh man, business is getting tough. And then they kind of back away from the table on that. Nah, man, we know when somebody, you know, like was in the red for 3 months, you know? I encourage a lot of forums to do some version of that.
Oh, that's excellent advice. So let's go right into the deep dive.
Let's do it.
Or otherwise known as the presentation. But that's the last time I'll put a little asterisk around it. But for my thinking and for people listening, the deep dive is sharing a crossroads that you have, something you have to make a decision. And that's what this podcast is all about. So can you walk through some different examples of what how a deep dive can look?
Yes, but can I be slightly contrary? I mean, this is why you had me on here. So you can't shake your head at this point.
We've met.
We're familiar. I would say that deep dives aren't just for the decision points in life. They're amazing for that because those are commonly watershed moments, right? In my personal life, in my professional life, right? But deep dives are also really great to explore the unexplored in that Johari window, which we can get into. But sometimes there is no decision, right? Sometimes it's just, I have been carrying an insecurity my entire life. I've been carrying a trauma. I don't like the way that I view myself. I don't like, and so I'm saying this because it's the same thing where I just want the space to explore something and hear experiences from others, even though in the next 5 years, I have no firm decision to make. I just want to think about this, or I want to change my perspective on something with no deadline in place. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. So with that, I forgot what the hell the question was.
Yeah.
Well, we've all done that and had a deep dive, and at the end of the day, we did nothing. And other than expose a massive fault in some area that we just don't have any clarity on. And I mean, I've had failed attempts at trying to get to the deep and then never getting there and never making the decision, and then faced with, a forced decision later because of an indecision prior, right? Give me some examples of that that's worked for either of you, where you went into a deep dive, you went through the coaching aspect and you do the presentation, and then you discover you're not making a decision of the thing you were making a decision on. It's something different.
This is my favorite shit. So I'll give you examples, and I'll mutter to respect confidentiality. Fortunately, I work with enough groups that it can meld all. Here's an example of one, just especially for those that are new, like in their first year or two, and you're still discovering what it is. I love these, especially with like open coaching, which maybe we should talk about to get into a deep dive. But one time somebody was presenting on this element of like hiring practices. I've got this major issue with turnover and culture, and I don't know what to do. And over the coaching, their stated thing was, I want to have a deep dive on how should I change my interview process, performance reviews, and culture, something like that. By the end of it, we're dealing with the fact that this person has so much identity wrapped up in their business. They are dealing with fears of rejection and trust that go all the way back to some childhood experiences that are suddenly informing the active culture of their business. And now we're having this whole discussion about, in life, how do you view rejection, intimacy, and trust? And suddenly that becomes the takeaway, and nobody's passing around HR manuals to come up with better hiring practices.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is beautiful. And that's getting deep.
Yeah.
And that all influences how we run our businesses each and every day. It could be a past experience I had with my mom. It could literally affect all of that.
I've lost track of the number of times I've gone into coaching and then come out with a completely different presentation. That just the act of speaking what's on my mind as I'm saying, I'm realizing, this is not really what I want to present on at all. It's something completely different, and it can go to the personal, as you've described.
An unbelievable example there of deep dives and what they talk about now. And I don't know if they used to push this term or not, but the whole idea of self-discovery and group discovery is one of the tenets that they talk about when they're talking about deep dives, which helps everybody understand, I'm not supposed to be giving this dude answers. We are exploring a space together through shared experience and jumping into it. And I love when you hear somebody say what you're saying, shit, I guess this isn't about an HR methodology at all. This is about the way I look at myself and the way I find value in the world. Like, oh my gosh, like how many places in the world do you have to go explore that shit? It's not a lot. I'm cussing. My ratio of cussing is drastically more than y'all's.
I'm holding back.
All right, we're not keeping track.
All right.
You're doing just great.
Okay.
Because at the ultimately, what we're trying to do is get to the meat of what a deep dive would mean to not only the form. So there's some lessons from the formates, because I learned just as much listening to someone's deep dive about me than I do about my own presentation. It's just, there's a lot of lessons, because these are not unusual challenges. Like, we have all faced some level of these challenges, and just listening to these stories really help mold our own businesses in many different ways. When talking about the actual deep dive, how much of it is important to have some kind of deck or some slides or a handout? How important is that and why would you even have that in a deep dive?
I'd say there's a couple things if the question is just like, hey, what resources are helpful? So one, tight timing helps. So to go ahead and it should be baked in the agenda, right? So exactly how long are we doing open coaching or the presentation, popcorn questions, around the room questions, experience shares, reflection, right? So whatever that format is great. And then this is going to sound so weird. And there are so many, I'll be honest, there are so many things that previously I would have cringed at. And then I hear something and then use it. And I'm like, holy shit, this is so helpful. So example, how many have you guys seen the Feel Wheel?
Yes.
Okay. No, you're going to have to educate me.
The Feel Wheel is fantastic. So the Feel Wheel is something that I have groups that laminate it and bring it to every single forum with them, because What the feel wheel does is it starts out, it's 3 concentric circles, and in the middle you have 8 basic emotions. And it's everything from it's like anger, happiness, joy, jealousy, something, 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 right? And then the second circle has 4 more nuanced terms of the main one, right? So anger could also be frustration, angst, right? It keeps breaking down. Then the third one has 2 or 3 per each of the prior, right? And the idea is, there's I think it's in Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. There's a book where they talk about it, which is whether it's language, emotion, anything, understanding the term that describes the thing. Like the example in Blink is about wine what's the name of the
Sauvignon Blanc?
No, what's the professional expert on wine?
Sommelier.
Sommelier, good gravy. You can tell I don't belong in EO. Those folks, they said that so much of it is understanding the terms that describe wine, and then you understand the nuance. It's the exact same thing with feelings. For folks that aren't used to that space, being forced, and I've seen groups where they won't let you use you can't use any of the boring 8 emotions. You have to use the further. That's what the feel wheel is for, is when you go to do it, get into the nuance, because that brings a greater level of understanding, more so than just, well, I'm either angry or happy, and that's all I got, buddy.
So basic, so basic. So any tips like this that you hear in our podcast, we're going to be in the show notes as a PDF attachment. So whether it's the YouTube channel or Spotify, there'll be some show notes for the feel wheel. That's a great leadway into really talking about feelings, about what someone is presenting. And so many times we're like, oh, it's a B or decision. It's not a B or decision. It's not yes or no, or door A, door B. It's has a lot more meaning behind that. Where does that feel wheel show up in past deep dives that you've seen?
So there's the 5% reflection sheet, which you may know as the monthly update. That term's out. So it's
not monthly update.
Not monthly update. That's out.
Okay.
That's gone.
What is it called again?
A 5% reflection. You want to know the why on that?
Yes, go for it.
Here's the why. The why is monthly update leads to those shallow conversations that you're talking about. The shallow dive, the shallow skim versus the deep dive. TM. Colton just came up with the shallow skim versus the deep dive. That's mine. So
TM.
Here's the concept behind that. The monthly update, people would go, okay, my kid, so my kid had soccer practice, the thing, and he broke his leg, and that was traumatic for him. And then we did, maybe I shouldn't choose breaking a leg. Maybe that is in your 5%. Sorry, I'm new to having a kid. I got a 7-month-old. What do I know? So, but monthly update sounds like what it is, right? Oh, update me on what's gone on in your life. 5% reflection is the opposite of that. It's not, oh, let me just update you, but let me take an hour or at least 30 minutes, a day or two before forum, to reflect on what has happened this month in the 5% of my life. And sometimes it's not even an event, which an update seems to be like an event. I had to fire my number 2, or I got a bigger tax bill than I expected, right? A 5% reflection, which is what I love, and somebody dropped this at a moderator summit recently. It's, and I've written it into our 5% updates. What is a question you're pondering? That is a great 5% update. No event happened, but for some reason, there's this question that keeps coming around in my mind, and it deals with my theology or my place in the universe, my value, my identity. You know what? Like, that's the stuff that's great. So that's the term difference between a 5% reflection and a monthly update.
Wow. Now, do you see a lot of forums? Because I had a moderator one time really force us to have our 5% reflections brought to the forum meeting, not doing at, many formates would write down their 5%. They're like, literally, just before it's starting, they're having their coffee and they're like, it's kind of like doing your last minute homework.
Yeah. We shame those people in our forum.
Yeah. As well you should. Well, so ours is punitive. We have the thing where we go around as part of the, hey, confidentiality, technology, you go through, technology off, all that stuff. Show your 5% reflection. If it's not filled out, $100 to the treasurer.
Wow, $100.
Show up, man.
That really makes a difference, those little fines. What other fines are you doing, Colton?
If you're 1 minute late, if you're 1 minute late, you have to split the bill that night with the group, and we go get drinks and dinner. You're not going to believe it. I'm a medium to heavy drinker, so the tab is normally, sufficient. It's sufficient. So if you show up, if you're late, you got to put your credit card in along with everybody else's, and you pick up half the bill. So that's
what's that nasty drink that you love so much?
Negroni.
Negroni, yeah.
Which I got from another EO guy, a ringer. I love that dude so much, but he's out in Pish Patel out in OKC. But anyway, man, I love Negronis.
Yeah, I find that the more time that I spend preparing for my 5% reflection, it's going to be hard to get used to that. The better it is. And the emotion wheel also, on our update form, we're asked to pick 3 emotions that this update we're about to give. How does that make us feel? So that can kind of get the attention of the others in the group. Oh, you're feeling aroused and dismayed and aggressive? What in the world is Colton about to say?
Can you go ahead and read the details on what that was that left you aroused and dismayed?
Wow. I was just randomly picking words.
I can see your 5% reflection right there. I'm looking at it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
All right.
It's awful.
We're going to take a photo of that. That'll be up on the show notes.
And
we'll have that.
I mean, every form is different. His experience is amazing, apparently, that a whole new level of form experience. They say you're supposed to make EO your own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing that keeps us from being aroused.
Eric's contribution to the podcast thus far is outweighing us tenfold.
So here's a question that I have. So in many deep dives, those are planned. You have some time and space between you're going to do a deep dive. And usually you decide on a deep dive at a form meeting well in advance. So you have usually some time, right?
Yet again, Cole, I'm just Johnny Contrary. That's all I'm here for. So deep dives are great, and commonly they can be planned. But we do deep dives. So our agenda is 1 planned presentation, which is typically a deep dive, and then 2 or 3 impromptus all in a 4-hour period. And some of those are deep dives as well. They may not take an hour, but that concept, deep dives being largely relegated to EQ elements. So if there's an issue that comes up, high importance, high urgency from a 5% reflection at the top of the meeting, we'll do a deep dive at the end that's totally unplanned. So another way I split the way we talk about presentation, I just did it myself. Deep dives or discussions is planned and unplanned.
That's really interesting because most forms I've been in, it's typically been 1 or maybe 2, but very planned and sometimes very long, right? But now this kind of adds a nuance. So you can do a planned or unplanned deep dive when it's necessary, which it happens, right?
Yep.
And those who have been around EO for a while, you're probably familiar with the parking lot, which is a list of, these are the things that we've heard that from your 5% reflection that could be a longer presentation. Deep dive.
It's going to happen. Let's go ahead and say we're going to take the swear jar off the table for now.
So you old folks out there that have been around EO for a long time, you've got your parking lot from your update. That is a potential, some of those things that get written down that stand out. The secretary in our forum actually writes those down. Hey, I heard that you're struggling with this. That might make a good presentation for you. And as Colton has so aptly described, you may do it right then and there at an impromptu deep dive, which is also something new because, I think the way you were trained, the way I was certainly trained, it was an event. We were not just doing it on the fly. It was something that you prepared for, you got coached for. But maybe, Colton, you can explain a little more why you would want to do that impromptu.
Are you guys doing impromptus or unplanned in your forums?
We're not taking advantage of it. It's rare. We have done them.
Cool. Yeah. Man, there is so much value to be gained in there. Now, granted, there's another skill set that goes along with it. And there's some templates and things like that you can follow. There's a coach's worksheet, which still works even for the impromptu. But man, like, I mean, YPO, for example, did away with planned presentations. I'm pretty sure, at least as of this podcast, I believe they had. And if you want to talk about some of the benefits there, one, I would argue also if you can get in more presentations, you know, like EO's recommending you have at least 8 members. If you think about that, you're only doing one presentation. That means in a typical year, most folks are only going to get the floor of the forum one time. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of 5% things that come up. The benefit of doing those, the benefit of doing some of the unplanned presentations rests on that whole balance of important and urgent. And so while you don't want urgent things to overtake what, you know, all the content and forum, there's a lot of times where stuff comes up where both those things are high. And you guys have seen it. How many times is it like, okay, all right, well, I'm supposed to present in December, and right now I have a topic idea, and by the time December gets here and I did all the work on it, it's like, I think kind of resolved itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
All the time.
So that's largely the value and the purpose in doing a lot of unplanned, I think.
But certainly the biggest plus for the plan is typically a plan when it's going to be coached. And that's where you're going to get the most value of everyone's time. Unplanned, is unplanned, and it can be all over the place. And if it's a unplanned hot topic that is really important, it may be best for that parking lot to have some space, because the coaching is tremendous value. So here's a question. Wildest deep dive. You have a story?
From ourselves?
Well, it could be from yourself, or you've heard a story of something, and it doesn't have to be like wild per se. For me, I had an experience when things were falling apart for me. And I was in a situation where I had a chain of wireless stores. It was Sprint stores, and T-Mobile acquired us, and they had to shut down 12 locations. And, there was no real outcome of the presentation other than giving me the ability to whine and bitch about my situation, right?
Yeah.
But it felt good that I could talk. I could just share it. And there wasn't anything that anyone had experienced really in my form that really could bring any level of experience, but just being able to have someone to talk to and let my fears be known, right? Because my team was already frightened. And so I couldn't really vocalize those fears with them as much as I'd like to. Anything like that for you guys?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have, this is de-identified, but I've worked with hundreds of EO members, YPO, Harvard Business School forums, all that stuff over many, 4 years now. So just dropping some stuff. Dude, I've been in forums and it's, hey, I haven't told anybody yet, but I've got a drug problem. I've been on Oxy since, for 6 months now, and I haven't told anybody, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. Is it rehab? Tell my wife, try and do it all secretly, yada, yada, yada. I mean, everything from affairs to my dad died 5 days ago, and I still haven't told anybody because my relationship with him is very complicated. I've heard you run the gamut of what it is, everything from, there's a couple of things that are like that stuff hits the fan and it's okay. Some things that borderline turned into an intervention because of relationships with alcohol and things people said to each other. There is coke and hookers. We could talk about the whole thing. I have heard it, seen it, and then had the like at this point now, nothing really phases you. And it's just, I love how transparent people are and trust that group. So sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm
still stuck at coke and hookers right now. We haven't had that yet. And I know one day maybe we'll get it and get to enjoy that experience share for sure. But it really kind of does shine the light of what could happen. Someone that is in a state where they are realizing they have an addiction. Really, how does a form deal with that level? Because those types of things kind of need a little bit of follow-up.
Maybe.
For me, the one that pops into my mind was, I want to say December of last year. My dad almost died, going through the whole ICU dance, understanding very quickly that nobody was talking to each other, and he's not getting the care he's supposed to be getting. For me, my presentation, my deep dive was around all the emotion that I felt. I got pretty red-faced. I dumped on the healthcare system that we have, which is a dumpster fire, if you ask me. But it was a way for me to at least feel a little bit of get a little empathy. I was walking around in a rageful attitude, hurt, thinking that my dad was going to die, that there were mistakes made, and so it was just nice to be heard. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anything really got resolved. I got a little bit of feedback in that presentation, but sometimes you just got to let the crazy out.
Eric Jackson. Sometimes you got to let the crazy out. I like it.
That's the place for it.
Yeah.
We need shirts. Yeah. That would be a great shirt for EO to have. Let the crazy out.
Who let the crazy out?
Why don't we let the crazy? Because we are a little bit weird. All of us. We're all. What is the percentages of people that are bipolar as entrepreneurs? Isn't it like 50% or something? I mean, it's
that'd be crazy. I know that there was a Swedish study done on this, but so both bipolar and mental illness among artists, creatives, and also entrepreneurs, it's like twice the average of like your standard population. So that's it. It's not 50%, but I'd be surprised if it was as high as 5-10%.
Yeah, and that statement, sometimes because I feel we are just different, because when you create something out of nothing, right, you have to have a certain level of being bold and kind of putting yourself out there to a certain extent. And so for a lot of people, like we have to be brave and we have to get outside our comfort zone. And sometimes in our heads, we think, well, am I crazy? You kind of wonder that.
Yeah. Well, there are times where you just can't really talk to people about what's going on in your business, and you got to be careful about what you say to certain individuals. Sometimes you just want to blurt these things out, but you can't, because you can damage your culture. You can damage relationships with your employees, your spouse. It's just and sometimes I'll just randomly call my forum mates just outside of forum and just go, hey, man, I've got something to I want to talk about. Can I get this off my chest? It's a beautiful place to be.
Robert, can we go back to something?
Sure.
One, I appreciate that. And I love the connection in between forums to make sure that like those individual bonds are very tight. It's huge, and I don't think enough forums like talk about that. So anyway, I've been guilty of that. 6 months go by, and the only time I see my forum is either at an EO event or at forum. So anyway, you had asked, all right, so what do you do in those scenarios, right? Which I would argue, if you're in EO for 30, 40 years and you have lots of different members, this would come up: substance abuse, alcohol abuse, stuff like that. And you said like, well, what do you do? That requires a follow-up, et cetera. One thing, so when those presentations happen, and this is kind of across the board, anytime someone's dealing with that, the question that I hope gets asked at some point is, how can the forum support you, right? And that can run the spectrum of like, hey, real quick, when this is over and we walk out of this room, how can we support you? Are you asking for check-ins? Are you asking for accountability? Do you need resources? What is it? And I need to be clear, because every forum has their own culture. And I know some groups that are like, dude, I didn't join an accountability group. I've got my small group at church or this, that, or the other, but still balancing whatever that looks like in your own personal ethos and what that looks like, I think is really important. But it's also, it's crucial to make sure that you respect that confidentiality and also that judgment-free zone. Because if someone drops something like that and then they make the wrong call on reporting them to somebody or getting their family members involved, you know what I mean, that you think you're doing in the best interest of that person, you are running a real risk there. And I'll be honest, most of the people that in my experience, everyone that talks about having a substance abuse problem but says, I don't need rehab, or I'm not ready to go, or whatever, trying to go around them to help them get help, and you're going to lose a lot of trust that way.
My wife mentioned something to me the other day that was discussed in forum, and she, did you know about this? I'm like, what? I don't want to discuss it. I'm sure that it was okay to share it, but I just, and my default is I don't talk to anybody else about what is said in forum, and that's kind of the standard, right? But there are times where things are shared, and you can share those. You just got to be really, really specific with the rest of your forum. And
it's great to ask. So, and then like a segue away from drug and alcohol and mental health, but also like we will ask that commonly at the end of ours. Hey, real quick, you're really celebrating this news here, right?
Right.
Is this real quick? Is this? And then it's great. So folks go, oh yeah. This entire presentation is fine. I'm really happy about it and excited.
Well, you kind of bring up something that's kind of interesting when you're talking about drug and alcohol abuse is getting the person doing the deep dive, getting other members of the forum to ask deeper questions, because it shows up in different ways for everyone, some addiction or whatever, but it affects everything. What could be happening is the company could be falling apart. His wife is leaving him. This is happening and that's happening, and he's bankrupt, right? You got to really go all the way deep, because there's a lot of components to that. And, how would you navigate that if you're in a forum like that and you are concerned about a member? Like, what would you do in terms of helping? Like, what's an avenue? Do you get other people in EO and keep names out of it and have conversations to ask for some advice on how to navigate that? Because I could see that happening for a lot of forums.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's appropriate. You care about these individuals. I definitely think it's appropriate to go look for resources, keep things anonymized. If you can go to places, hey, I have a friend or there's someone in my life, et cetera, I think that's healthy. I also think just honoring the transparency that's baked into forum is also great, just by sharing that with that person. Or, all these folks that have high empathy, reaching out to that person afterwards and saying, hey, man, I know we did that presentation, stuff like that. I just needed you to hear, man, I love you, I care about you, and I have concern about you right now, and I want what's best from you. How can I support, et cetera? Because I'm going to be honest, having somebody committed, doing things against someone's will that's not ready, pushing them beyond what they're ready to admit, go into, rarely works well. And I just had this conversation the other day with somebody else calling up to ask about it. Being there for the person when they are ready to answer that, ready to ask the question is key. No one has, I've never heard of a case where someone forces an intervention and it's tremendously successful. However, walking with someone, checking in on folks, I think is very appropriate. So when they have something in life where a loved one says something to them elsewhere, they have a near-death experience, and then they finally say, man, I've got to do something. What should I do? You being the person that's close enough to them and has maintained that relationship is really your best opportunity to help that person get on a better path. I think. Now, granted, I am not a licensed therapist, and nobody sue me or anything, and you got to deal with consequences here on both sides, but that's the stance that I've taken in life.
Yeah.
I've had people reach out to me and, just say, hey, I'm here for you. Well, all right. While we're on the phone, let's talk about this. It does work. Just knowing you've got that ear at any time is it's a big lift.
There's been a few people, and this is inside and outside of Forum and EO, but I've had folks where they've literally ditched the rest of their family has turned their back on them. I've gotten that call. All of my friends, all my family have turned my back on me, right? Because either they think, oh, it's just another cry for help, or this has been going on for years now. And being close with that person also has its own elements, right? Like I've got an individual in my life outside of EO, and it's me and one other person that are still in this person's life. Everybody else had largely abandoned them. But I, even with my therapist, had to work on what the boundary is there. Because how much, which is also a key part of EO, how much of your burden can I take on and set expectations for you that's unfair? And so how do I operate in this space? And I've cried to my therapist about this person saying, I've got to make these decisions. I can't welcome you into my house and do this or that. Like, at what point are you taking advantage, and at what point am I enabling? And then having to deal with the very weird headspace of, if this person dies, am I okay with the decisions I've made on how I am walking alongside this person? which is some heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's deep.
Very heavy.
If I get that call, am I going to be going, why didn't I text him? Why didn't I text him this week? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't mean to get real dark real quick, but if you're in a space where people are talking about the 5% and exactly what you're saying, how do you show up? Those are really important questions to wrestle with, and then figure out how do you settle that with yourself?
Yeah, and the reality is entrepreneurship is very difficult in and of itself. But when you're also depressed, it's nearly impossible. It's tough to navigate. It's tough to show up with your own team with energy when one is depressed, right? And, finding an outlet in a form experience can be very helpful. Even just to find somebody to go on walks with, to find someone who has been down that very same journey, because we all have had some pretty incredible lows that need to be shared. And sometimes it maybe doesn't even feel right to share in your forum, but one-on-one, getting someone where you can say, hey, there's some, you think that's bad? Why did you hear this story, right? And when you tell them, they're like, oh, okay. It's like if you go to any of these, I hear these stories all the time. My father-in-law, he went through some depression. And he was in one of these meetings with other people that were also depressed. And he's in this room with this man who cut off his arm because he was so depressed. And here he is with a stub for an arm, and he comes out of that experience like, oh, I got both arms, I'm good.
Yeah.
And he just like changed his level of viewing his own personal situation, which was there was nothing going wrong. He had just retired, right? And we all go through that situation where you sell a business or a major life change, like a divorce, or it could be kids living away, going to school. Like there's 1,000 reasons that you could find yourself where I'm depressed. How am I depressed? Right?
You just described the reason why what has become some of the most common curriculum that I wind up doing when facilitating retreats with people is defining their values and then their purpose and meaning in life. I can't tell you how many times I'm at a retreat and there's, guys or gals in their 50s or 60s. They've exited their business. They've had a great family life. And now I have a number of analogies that we've had to use that I've picked up along the way. I lost my jetpack. I can't find my next dragon to slay. I don't know the next mountain to climb. Like, all these things. And it is unbelievable to see someone that has had so much success by most metrics that you could, and so many individuals get to that point, and they didn't take some time along the way to look at what they value, where they find their own identity and meaning in life. And then when so much of that stuff exits and they got a big bank account, good gravy, do they go through some tough times mentally.
Yes. And this would make a good forum exercise, right? I've defined mine. I don't know about you guys.
No,
mine is to connect and grow people. And that's a part of my company's purpose. But it's, now I know what I want to do in the company. I know what I want to do outside the company. And so if I had a big exit, sure, things would change, but my core purpose would not change.
Yeah. I discovered this same thing when I sold my business. I went through some depression. That whole year after selling the business, it felt just like the divorce I had in 2001, identical, the exact same feeling. And it wasn't until I sat with a counselor who walked through this book called The Three Marriages. We have a relationship with ourselves, with our spouse, and our purpose. Lose any of those things, and you're going to have that sense of loss, anger, frustration, all those things. And, forum is a great place to begin to share those things. I love the idea of defining what our purpose is with our forum mates, because that's also a good question when it comes to when they're sharing a place in their life or a decision they need to make. And I know your purpose, and I can point out, well, you said at the beginning of the year, this is your purpose. Now, is this still your purpose? Are you still on this direction? And it's okay to change your purpose, right?
Yeah.
But how nice is it to have someone to kind of call you up and say, all right, what is it? Make some decisions here. And if you're going to change, that's great. But let's all work through this together, because those are the things that we're wanting out of that 5% reflection to come up. And so that recognition of us off track. And that's why it's so beautiful about having other form mates that, hey, off track. Let's get back in where we need to be, because I can see you're off track. I want to be called out as a member of form. Who else calls us out? Nobody. Nobody's calling us out in our companies, right? Rarely is anybody, they're telling us what we want to hear.
This is why I love the values, meaning, and vision exercise. I mean, it takes 4 to 6 hours to do it right.
Yes.
But forums that do this on retreat together, where you wind up at the end of that retreat, is that you've done this exercise together to define the values for everybody. My personal thing is no one deserves to feel alone. And that's kind of my mission which we go down that whole separate thing. But if you do this, if you do the values, meaning, and then vision for life, folks come away with this snapshot where each individual's had a chance to share with the rest of the group right now across 8 dimensions of my life: my business, finances, personal, spiritual, social, etc. How do I feel on a scale of 1 to 10? And everybody is up front with this giant white sheet of paper, and they have notes on this. And in a 8-10 minute window, they've all gone away and done some exercise. They come back and they present to everybody, here's how I feel about life right now. That's thing 1. So you kind of have a snapshot. I love doing this exercise. You see me getting excited. This is why I love it. And I got to do it at like 50% of the retreats. Then the other one, at the very end, I have them do. I'm not gonna reveal. I'm gonna leave some prestige for it. But there's a vehicle you get to planning 5 years in the future, and you talk about what that life is like. So everybody leaves the retreat knowing what you look like right now, and then what has to happen between now and 5 years from now, which gives you that sense of, even if people don't want accountability, I still want to know what is driving you. What do you really want to do in life? And then whether or not it's accountability or just friendship and knowing to check in on stuff, just inside or outside of forum, it's such a valuable tool.
Dude, I'm absolutely doing this on our next retreat, because many of the formates, they don't have any vision.
No.
And it's the first time in their life anybody said, what are you doing? Because a lot of us are just in the wheel. We run into the wheel and we're running and running and running, and then we're looking around and like, oh my God, I've done this for 20 years. Where am I going? Nowhere. And gosh, vision, and knowing everyone's vision too, because a lot of those visions that we have is what we want to do actually align with other people in our form going through the exact same journey. And if I know there's another formate going on that same path, that's another connection point. It's another thing in that 5% I'm listening for when we're doing those 5%. I should be hearing that vision appear when they start sharing. And if I don't, I think it's safe for us to go, all right, remember we did that thing at the retreat that 2 years ago you said? I wrote it here. It's written down, right? Where are you here? And it really kind of forces, but because we all get off track. There's always something, right? You have the best intentions on Monday, and then Julie quits, right? And then you never go there, and you forget what you did in that retreat. So that reminder is huge.
Can I throw another exercise at you?
Let's do it.
Have you heard of Ikigai? So it's the Japanese concept for purpose or meaning in life, right? And I'll be honest, I've tried to turn this into an exercise, and because it's Japanese and it's like Eastern philosophy, it doesn't land as well in Western culture, especially with entrepreneurs that are like, no, give me a list, where's the goals, give me the KPIs, and write all the stuff. Here's what I love though, it draws, and I'm doing this right now with all the Forum Sherpa in January. We're going to present all of ours to each other because we get together and talk, yada, yada, yada. But there's a worksheet, and Ikigai has a Venn diagram with 4 overlapping circles. And it's what I can get paid for, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the 4th. What I'm good at. Oh, what I'm good at, what I enjoy. That's it. What I'm good at, what I enjoy, which are not always the same thing, what I can get paid for, and what the world needs. And there's a whole series of exercises where you can go through and fill that out. And Ikigai means finding as many things, find the things that are in the middle of that, and then find ways to cut some of those things on the outside so you're spending more and more time focused right and living into your Ikigai.
Thanks for listening to the Decision Podcast by Nashville EO. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.